Last I checked, Republicans were supposed to be really big on law enforcement and funding law enforcement, unless it might actually help working people. And then it becomes a different debate, apparently.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Boss Watch is a segment that we do every week where we talk about what bosses were up to in the last week, because the evening news always has, this segment like every time where they show mugshots about people who are arrested for shoplifting or trespassing or whatever. And you never see bosses on the evening news with their mugshots, because crimes by employers are not criminalized. But if we do as workers literally the exact same thing, we would end up under the jail. And so this segment is intended to emphasize that. Starting in Florida, the U.S. Department of Labor has recovered $900,000, almost $1 million in stolen wages and liquidated damages for 75 workers of a Florida grocery store enterprise, after finding their employer wrongly exempted them from eligibility for overtime pay. The department's wage and hour division determined that La Primavera Store Incorporated, operating as La Primavera Supermarket in Fort Pierce, Bradenton, and Sarasota, incorrectly categorized the affected workers as overtime exempt and did not pay them the required time and a half rate for over 40 hours in a work week. Investigators found the employees did not meet certain criteria for exemption. And in addition to wage violations, the division learned that La Primavera Store employed two 15-year-old employees to work outside of legally allowable hours in violation of federal child labor regulations. Specifically, the employer employed the young workers past 7 p.m. during the school year and more than 18 hours during school weeks. The division assessed the employer with a $1,500 penalty to address the child labor violations. And it's worth noting that the Florida legislature wants to make that legal. The Florida legislature right now, a bill is moving through the legislature and is being passed by committees and houses in the legislature to allow children to work over 30 hours in a school week while they're in school. They want to make it legal to do that. Insane. In Georgia, a Silver Creek plumbing contractor could have prevented a 34-year-old employee's June 2023 fatal fall at a Rome work site by following required safety procedures, a U.S. Department of Labor investigation found. Investigators with the department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration learned that a 3-person crew from K&D Plumbing Incorporated was replacing a sewer line at Armuchee High School when they encountered a blockage in a pipe. To clear the blockage near the end of a 60-foot-long trench, one worker entered a manhole. A short time later, the worker fell about 20 feet, where they succumbed to injuries as a result of the fall and subsequent exposure to a high atmospheric concentration of hydrogen sulfide gas. The Rome Fire Department used a gas monitor to test the air inside the manhole and discovered the presence of hydrogen sulfide at 1,900 parts per million. The OSHA permissible exposure limit for hydrogen sulfide is 20 parts per million. It's about 100 times over the allowable limit. An environmental concentration of 100 parts per million is considered immediately dangerous to life or health. OSHA cited the employer for willfully failing to develop and implement a permit-required confined space entry program, including testing and ventilating the space before allowing employees to enter a manhole. The agency also cited K&D with 6 serious violations for not providing ladders or other safe means of egress from the 6-foot deep trench and protections or controls for water accumulation inside the trench. In addition, the employer failed to have a competent person inspect the trench prior to workers entering and for not ensuring excavated soil and uninstalled piping were stored at least 2 feet from the trench edge, preventing them from rolling back inside the trench and striking workers. The agency proposed $180,000 in penalties.
Hey, 5 seconds, just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
In North Carolina, the U.S. Department of Labor has recovered $168,000 in back wages for 51 workers at a Wilmington storm response contractor that misclassified them as independent contractors and failed to pay them for several months after work was completed. The department's Wage and Hour Division found Utility Resource Services, LLC, which employs former utility workers and drivers to identify and report line and power issues in areas affected by hurricanes, violated minimum wage and overtime violations of the Fair Labor Standards Act when it failed to pay many of the affected workers for more than 7 months. Just didn't pay them for the work that they had done for over half a year. Wild. Investigators also learned the employer had misclassified some employees as independent contractors and did not pay them the required time and a half rate after 40 in a work week, and failed to maintain payroll records for its employees. During the investigation, the employer reported that they could not make payroll after the company holding the contract for those services failed to pay them. But it doesn't matter. You still got to pay. You still got to pay your workers. So yeah, really, really wild stuff, and they just get away with it, right? You can kill somebody. You can steal $1 million from workers, as long as you're an employer and not a regular working person. It's fine. All you got to do is pay the money back. Absolutely. Should be unacceptable. I have a few dishonorable mentions we wanted to make sure that we got to this week. A Norfolk Southern employee was killed in a train crash in Decatur, Alabama. The National Transportation Safety Board said that they're going to be doing a thorough investigation, but a full report could take up to 2 years to finish. U.S. Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division investigators found the ambulance service provider paid workers an incorrect overtime rate. The agency found that the employer failed to pay the correct overtime rate after the Florida minimum wage rate increased from $10 to $11 per hour on September 30th, 2022. Instead, Excelsior Ambulance Service continued paying the lesser wage rate after the change became effective, leading to paying overtime at rates lower than required by law. The division recovered $33,000 in back wages and liquidated damages for 28 workers. Investigators with the U.S. Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division found that an employer incorrectly determined that 7 seasonal employees were exempt from overtime and paid them straight time instead of time and a half for hours over 40 in a work week. Additionally, the employer failed to properly compute compensatory time for 17 year-round employees. These actions violated the Fair Labor Standards Act, and they recovered $27,000. So there you go. That is that's Boss Watch. And I mean, it really,
and there was more, y'all. There
Yeah,
was a
there
lot
was
more
more.
we could have pulled from. That was just a sampling of
Right.
bad behavior by bosses over the past couple weeks.
It really is. I mean, folks should be appalled at the things that employers are allowed to get away with I mean, really what amounts to just a slap on the wrist, if it can even be counted as that, because these penalties are just so, I mean, the penalties often just amount to pay the workers what they owed, right? There's no jail time. There's no, probationary period a lot of times. It's so amazing that employers are able to get away with this kind of stuff. And while, normal people have mugshots thrown all over the news if we steal toothpaste from a Walgreens.
Yeah, and I was going to say that, the EEOC, the Department of Labor, these agencies that are doing these enforcement actions, they're underfunded and short-manned, and also you have politicians who want to make that worse, right? Because of their wealthy, powerful donors who don't even like this little bit of accountability. Like,
Right.
even the slaps on the wrist is too much.
Right.
For some in capital who would prefer to have zero consequences at all, not even, these minor bits of accountability that we can get. And so it's important that, these agencies that are technically law enforcement agencies, right?
Right.
And, last I checked, Republicans were supposed to be really big on law enforcement and funding law enforcement. I guess, unless it might actually help working people. And then it becomes a different debate, apparently.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.